All right. We got him. The man himself, Brigadier General Tony Tata. His new book that it's funny. When I got this book, I told the publisher who sent it to me, I said, dude, I'm buried in authors. I'm not going to be able to get to this for a few weeks. Get in touch with me in a few weeks, and we'll talk about getting the general on the show. And then I picked up the book, and I read like 5 pages, and then I couldn't put it down, and I finished it a day or two later, a few days ago, and I got back in touch with the publisher and said, all right, let's get him on the show now, because what a freaking good book. My special guest for the first time on the show, Brigadier General, retired Tony Tata. General, thanks so much for being here. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Ross. It's great to be on your show.
Would love to talk to you about a couple things before we get to the book, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So I am told by friends in high places that you have plenty to say about China and coronavirus. I mean, we know you have plenty to say about lots of things, but I'm very curious about your take from your particular perspective about the origins of COVID and just sort of the whole national discussion about that right now.
Yeah, so it's interesting, Ross, where you really think about we've lost 600,000 Americans plus, 3 million plus globally. And China knew what was happening right on the ground. And they shut down internal traffic, internal aviation, internal rail, all of that. So because they knew how contagious this virus is. And yet they allowed it to be exported globally. And that was a very intentional decision on their part to allow for the exportation of this virus globally. And then they covered up and they hid and they obfuscated, and they were not clear with the rest of the world how dangerous this virus was. And so that's some intentionality on their part. And then you layer in that you had the funder of the lab, the Wuhan lab, that now, the media is starting to say, well, perhaps, it could have been man-made. And communicating with Anthony Fauci, who, was right inside the team there. And I'm thinking, all right, so if China accidentally launched a nuke and killed 600,000 Americans, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of the Chinese military reached out to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs here and said, we're not going to tell you anything about how this accident happened, would we have viewed it in the same way? Because that's essentially what happened. They very intentionally shut down internal and very intentionally allowed external travel to happen. And why was Fauci collaborating with these people and towing the party line that China and the funders of this lab wanted? That's a real serious question, but you don't have serious journalism anymore, Ross. Right. What we have is operatives that are trying to erase whatever positive legacy that President Trump had, and they did their damnedest to disrupt positive action during the 4 years he was in office. And so what you really have here is a media that is incurious about real issues confronting our country and is supportive of an orthodoxy that they puts them in power. And it's a really dangerous time in our country right now with this, I call it the fake news digital complex, where you have big tech, you have the media, you have politicians. Eisenhower used to warn about the military industrial complex. Well, now we've got the fake news digital complex, and you cannot have any honest conversation. You cannot have any serious inquiry into things that might be counter to the narrative. And it's a really dangerous place to be.
Yeah, it ties into something I was talking about with my listeners before you were on the show. But this morning, there was a recent poll where they asked people, how much trust do you have in, fill in the blank institution? And the two lowest trust institutions were the federal government and the media. And the media was lowest. below lots of other things. And it's for the reasons that you describe. For those just joining, my very special guest for the first time on the show, Brigadier General Tony Tata, General commanded units in some of the most famous, most historic Army units, 82nd Airborne, 101st Airborne, 10th Mountain Division. He also served as Undersecretary of Defense for Policy in the Trump administration, kind of during the heart of all this COVID stuff. So my just last question on the COVID thing. What did you feel that, or feel is the wrong word, what did you understand or know during your time in that job about the potential / likely sources of COVID, putting aside any sort of partisan stuff, because none of this should be? What did you think the source was, and why did you think it a year ago?
So obviously the intelligence community worked really hard at getting to the bottom of this to serve our nation and protect our citizens. And so the things that we saw on an unclassified level pretty much paralleled the tension that you saw in the media, and that was there were some people that believed that it could have happened in the lab, and there were some people that believed that it was the party line of the wet market. And so the idea, extrapolating up to the point I was making previously, is that there's a media that's vested in hiding or propagating the party line. And so it became really dangerous to say anything counter to that. And so it's a really dangerous time right now for our country, because we just have a media that is so vested in outcomes as opposed to getting to the truth.
Mm-hmm. All right, one last question before we talk about the book. You have been quite outspoken in your support of President Trump and certain policy things, and there have been some other flag officers, General Flynn comes to mind, and some others similar. And then there were lots of folks in the military with lots of scrambled egg on their hats who took the other side and were very public against Trump. And by the way, I come from a military family myself. My mom, believe it or not, retired at the same rank that you did. Navy,
well, congratulations to Mom.
Yeah. And Dad was an 06, so not bad either.
Yes, that's great.
But I'm wondering, in a more macro sense, what you think the proper way is for military people, even retired military flag officers, to be involved in politics and a political discussion. Like, did you feel like you jumped in because you should, or did you feel like you jumped in because all these other flag officers were piling in on the other side and you wanted to add a little balance? Do you think it would be better if, former generals just kept quiet about politics, or do you think they should speak up?
Yeah, so it's interesting. That's a great question, Ross. And I've when I retired, I became an education leader. I thought that education was the most important thing we could do, particularly for our low-income communities. And so I was the chief operating officer of DC Public Schools, and then I was the superintendent of Wake County Public Schools in Raleigh, North Carolina, the Research Triangle, one of the largest systems in the country. And with 150,000 students and 170 schools and 18,000 employees. So, and we did great. We had the best year the system's ever had in Raleigh under my leadership. So I became very vested at the grassroots level in outcomes that I knew that our country needed. Having served at the federal level, working with 18 to 21-year-olds, primarily in the military, and then working on the inverse of that, 17 and below, in high schools and middle schools and elementary schools. It was really passionate work for me. My parents were teachers. My sister was a teacher, and then I became Secretary of Transportation in the state of North Carolina, and I saw the sharp elbows of state politics and the media intercession and all of that. And so I was always just a kind of middle of the road guy, a solutions oriented guy is what I would say. And I had a few months, and I want to say 2018. I just lost my mother. There was just coming out that the whole Russia story that was just being propagated over and over, and everybody I knew that it was not true, except for some of the true believers on the left that I had a lot of friends for. And the insanity of what was happening and the way the media had turned to this block of just constant pressure on Trump, it outraged me. And so for about 3 months, I engaged. And then I kind of wish I hadn't, because, it's useless to do so, because you can't truly fight the city hall of the media, because they're just going to come back and smack you down. And so, I went through a tough time last year because I paid the price for a couple of things I'd said on Twitter. But, it is a free country. And we're at a place now where it doesn't matter what you've done in life, the contributions you've made in life. What matters is what you've said, and if you get judged by all my friends know.
You don't just get judged by what you said. You get judged by the one worst thing you ever said.
Right. Yeah.
Or
so
the one error.
The media wants to define you by your worst possible moment. So if every human being is defined by their worst possible moment, what kind of world is that the media is creating for us?
So just real quick, because I do want to get to the book, just give me sort of a short answer on that question. Do you think in general retired flag officers should kind of keep their opinions to themselves, or do you think it's useful for society and worth whatever it costs for retired generals and admirals to be talking politics in public?
No, we're people. We have opinions. We have experience that's useful, and I think with social media, it's kind of impossible to do now anyway.
So I want to talk about Chasing the Lion, and for those folks just joining, my very special guest, first time on the show, Brigadier General retired Tony Tata. His book is called Chasing the Lion. Couldn't put it down. What a fantastic book. And let me just say right off the bat, so I don't forget, thank you so much, as you being an Army guy, for making so many of the good guys in this book Navy. You don't see that all the time.
That was purely by accident, I think.
I mean, one of your best guys is an admiral, and the SEALs help out at the end. It's awesome.
Right.
So I don't want to give away much about the book because people need to buy it and read it. But the bottom line is, an attack by Iran against the United States, and then some kind of shenanigans going on by senior leaders in the American presidential cabinet and so on. So two things. First, the main real bad guy in this book, the Iranian who follows on after the death of Qasem Soleimani, who you note in the book, do you think that person exists?
Yeah, and so Darius Perazad is the antagonist in this book, and he's an amalgamation of all the 10-foot tall, perceptions that we have of our enemies, right? And he's an Olympic boxer, he's ruthless killer, and he is the protagonist's opposite, right? So he's in charge of the Quds Force, and Garrett Sinclair is in charge of Joint Special Operations Command. And so they have a history, and it was a lot of fun to create the protagonist with one set of qualities and the antagonist with sort of almost an inverse set of qualities, though he's a very human person with his own drive and his own goals and his own past that he has to reconcile. So it was a lot of fun to write, and I'm sure that in Iran, Qasem Soleimani was a very storied figure in that part of the world, and also a very brutal butcher that killed over 600 Americans with his explosively formed penetrator IEDs.
I think I was one of the few people in media who came out immediately and said I supported the strike that killed Soleimani. And there were so many people, including people I really respect, right? Former four stars and former, heads of intelligence agencies who said it was too risky and not worth it. I'm like, you know what? That guy has so much American blood on his hand. He's got to go. And I assume you supported that the moment you heard about it.
Absolutely. I was on Fox, probably 10 shows in 2 or 3 days. And I know, all of the whataboutism and the equivocating, absolutely, the people had said, okay, I'm glad he's dead, but, Trump shouldn't have done it. And it was a real moment of decisiveness, of leadership, of execution. And it was a perfect strike to eliminate a really bad guy. And all the naysayers and doomsayers, from 2 years ago or whenever that, 18 months ago, have said, nothing's come of that other than, they had one barrage of a bunch of rockets that landed in the middle of, a vacant, courtyard.
Right.
So,
I mean, if I were making a list, of the people who really needed to wake up dead one day, and we already scratched off bin Laden and al-Baghdadi, I think Soleimani would have been number one name left on the list for me. I'm not an expert like you, but I'm not a total novice either.
No.
So let me run something else by you. So you mentioned now the protagonist, General Sinclair. And one of the things that's real interesting to me about this book, and that I wanted to ask you about, do you know of units? And maybe you were part of this yourself because you commanded a lot of things in a lot of units. But I'm unaware of situations where people who have stars on their shoulders are going out in the field and doing that kind of work like he is in this book. Is that, from your imagination, or are you aware of, people like you or people like Mick Raven or, badass types sort of getting out there even when they got stars on their shoulders?
I certainly went on a few missions with my troops in Afghanistan, and certainly got shot at multiple times, and as a flag officer, and Stan McChrystal was storied for having done that with his guys. So to me, it wasn't a stretch. And I know I've gotten a little bit of chatter on that. Well, what's a general doing in a helicopter with a bunch of sergeants? And every leader is different. I remember Jim Gavin, General Jim Gavin, the father of the airborne. He was he made all 4 jumps in World War II, and was on the ground as a general with his M1 and huddled up with the little groups of paratroopers until they made big groups of paratroopers and then got after the Germans. And that was just the way he led. He made all 4 big jumps into Sicily and Salerno and Normandy and Holland.
All right, I've got time for one more. I'm already over time, but I'm enjoying this too much, so I'm going to keep going. My special guest, Tony Tata, his new book, Chasing the Lion. If you like military thrillers, this is just a really, really fun read. So, the Ring Knockers. Let's talk about the Ring Knockers for a minute. So, obviously you spent time in the military, but you also spent some time in government. And I'm wondering whether your view of certain people in the American government being willing to do things that go way across a line of what any American should be willing to do in order to reach a foreign policy goal. Try not to give away too much here. But is that something that you feel like you really saw? And again, it was interesting for you to make the West Pointers the bad guys in the book, and thank you for making Navy the good guys. Do you really think there are these kind of hawks in government that would cross an ethical and perhaps and legal line in order to reach a desired foreign policy goal?
Well, it happened, and we diverted all of our attention from Afghanistan to chase folly in Iraq back in 2002-3 timeframe, and from my point of view, even back then, I was a colonel in the 101st Airborne. I was in Kosovo, deployed in a operational zone with my troops, and what we had was Wolfowitz and Pearl and Cheney and Rumsfeld all wanting to grind the axe in Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11. And I think of all the friends I've lost in that war, and we didn't finish the business in Afghanistan, and it was just a really a lack of focus on the real issue. The one time the nation had given us carte blanche to deliver a hit on a platter, we didn't do it during that tenure, and they used that goodwill of the American people to go after Iraq. It had nothing to do with it, and it's that seminal moment in our history where you got warmongers like Cheney and Wolfowitz and Pearl that were just absolutely chomping at the bit to get after Saddam Hussein for whatever personal reason, and it was the biggest head fake I think in our history, at least in modern times.
Yeah, I'll just put my last comment on this. And again, I didn't serve; both my parents did. And I've so many friends in the military, from folks who were, 03 all the way up to, the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, or people I consider my friends. And what a lot of people who've never been around the military don't understand is they think that that military folks are all excited to get into a war so they can go shoot guns and missiles and fly planes. And yeah, the plane part is probably fun. But typically, it's politicians who want the war.
Right.
For the members of the military, they know that either they're going to get killed or men or women that they're leading are going to get killed and their friends are going to get killed. And, I mean, again, you're the military guy. I'm not. So you tell me if I'm off base here. No pun intended.
You're right on the mark, Ross. It's just one of those things that you have people that never served making decisions, and civilian control of the military is important. But when you're making that kind of decision, and you're shifting a focus away from what you've been granted the authority to do, or at least the goodwill to do by the American people, and then shifting it to really the strategic blunder of Iraq, and where we've now got Iran halfway into Iraq now. We've created conditions for a power vacuum and all of the ensuing problems that have resulted. So, it was. There is malfeasance in government. I'll tell you that right up front.
Folks, go buy Tony Tata's new book, Chasing the Lion. You will thoroughly enjoy it as we head into the summer. It's almost summer. Great summer read. Great read anytime. General, thanks so much for being here. It's been a pleasure having you for the first time. I hope you'll do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ross, so much to you and your listeners.
All right, I'll tell you what. Let's ponder all that, and we'll take a short break. We'll be right back.